The confrontation between the forces of this world plays itself out in a complex story of the events that unfold through the many machinations that men create by their various endeavors, composed of all sorts of intentions. To the public in general, things do not seem to have any particular pattern, nor does there seem to be much meaning behind most events. That for the average person, there is not much significant outside his daily coming and goings. But a careful examination of the interplay of these conflicting forces reveals complicated, cleverly schemed operation, which displays the actually deeply meaningful course of reality. That life is the conception of a much more sophisticated wisdom than what we had previously envisioned. The following is a humble attempt to expose some of that reality. We are in a particular period in time when darkness is predominating. Some of what you are about to watch may appear fantastic, but we must remember that our failure to apprehend such matters is merely the sad fact of underestimating our own selves. We underestimate the potential for good and bad in human beings, because we underestimate our select, but we fail to exercise it to its true potential. The capabilities of our intellect lie far beyond what we suspect. The Masonic calendar traditionally dated from 4004 BC. The creation of the universe, Anno Mundi, as computed by Archbishop James Ussher in 1650. This was inserted by Bishop William Lloyd of Winchester as a marginal note in the grade 1701 edition of the English Bible, where it remained without explanation until 1900 when Cambridge University Press removed it from further editions. By the mid-18th century, Masonic usage had shifted to the year of light, Anno Lucis, which dated from 4000 BC. There is no Masonic significance to either date, other than a desire by early Masonic writers to create as ancient a lineage for Freemasonry as their imaginations would allow. By using the 4000 date, they could claim that their usage predated Ussher's promotion of the theory that Jesus had been born 4 years earlier than claimed by Dionysius Exiguus, the 6th century creator of the BC AD time system. The Masonic date adds 4,000 years to the currently accepted origins of the Christian era, or Year of Our Lord. It is less than 3 centuries off the date given by the Jewish calendar which, in its present form, dates from the 4th century BC and counts the years since zero the creation of the world according to its own reading of the Bible. This calendar is not accepted everywhere. The Masons of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, and in particular those at the Great of Night Kaddish, use the Hebrew months and a calendar based on Jewish chronology, or Anno Hebraico, also known as Anno Mundi. This calendar begins in mid-September and adds 3,760 years onto the Gregorian calendar. According to the Masons, the temple is an image of the world, and the beginning of the world establishes time. This time is known as the Year of the Light, or Anno Lucis. let us continue with the Masonic calendar. There are a total of 5 different calendars that are used by Freemasons. Franc-Maçonnery's calendar commences with the creation of the world, and uses the terminal Lucius, meaning, in the year of light. To arrive at this date, they add 4000 to the common time, as the earth was believed in conventional theology to have begun in 4000 BC. Therefore the year 2007 becomes 6007. Royal Archmasons date time from the year the Second Temple was commended by Zerubbabel. Anno Inventionis, which means in the year of discovery, is the terminology used by chapters. This adds 530 to the common time, therefore the year 2007 becomes 2537. Royal and Select Masters, or Cryptic Masons, date from the year in which the Temple of Solomon was completed. It is called Anno Depositionis, which means, in the year of the deposit, and adds 1000 to the common time. Therefore the year 2007 becomes 3007. Knights Templar start their calendar with the formation of the order, in 1118 AD. Anno Ordinus, which means, in the year of the order, is the terminology used. This deducts 1118 from the common time. Therefore the year 2007 becomes 889. The Scottish Rite date the same as Craft Masons, except for the use of the Jewish chronology. Anno Mundi, which means, in the year of the world, is their calendar terminology, and adds 3760 to the common time. Therefore the year 2007 becomes 5767. The chamber of reflection is present only in certain Masonic rites. It's a small room in which the candidates are left on their own for a period before the initiation ceremony begins. Seated at a table, they write their philosophical will, which is later to be read out in the lodge. The initiate is alone with a sheet of paper and a pencil. The chamber of reflection is lit only by a candle, which casts its feeble light on a number of ornaments, a human skull, some bones, a lump of bread, a flask of water, an hourglass, a saucer containing salt and another containing sulfur. On the wall are murals painted in white on a black background, a cockerel, a scythe, and the word vitriol, or vitrolum, which is the ancient command to examine oneself. The chamber exists in the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite and continental European Lodge, but not in the emulation Rite. It is important to note that we are currently covering the fundamentals and historical aspects of Freemasonry. We will reach a more in-depth discussion about the craft at a later stage. This series hopes to cover all aspects about the subject matter, including but not limited to Freemasonry, the Kabbalah, black magic, the Illuminati, atheism, the Jinn, and Zionism, just to mention a few topics. I do hope that you will be patient and focused, to be able to see the bigger picture, that I hope to be able to illustrate towards the conclusion of this series. With God's blessings, let us continue. Let us begin by defining a few terms. Operative Masons are the early stonemasons, more famously known for building the Gothic cathedrals, abbeys and castles of Europe. However, the first Grand Lodge of speculative masonry was founded in London, in June of 1717. The Freemasons began to accept what is known as speculative masons, or in other words, ordinary people, who did not possess any of the stonemasons' knowledge, or building construction abilities. Outsiders, or non-masons, are labeled as profanes, by the Masons. The reason why Masons use such a condescending term for non-Masons is because they do not possess the knowledge the Masons do, simply put.
And the star on his skin?
Pinnacle.
And its meaning?
The pinnacle is a pagan religious icon.
Devil worship.
So where does Freemasonry originate from? In the Cook manuscript of 1410, one of the oldest known texts which deals with Freemasonry, we read that, at the time of the construction of the Temple of Solomon, begun by King David, Solomon employed 24,000 Masons, and Solomon confirmed the rights which his father David had bestowed upon the Masons. Solomon himself taught them their methods, that is to say their traditions and practices, which are not very different than the rituals and rites practiced by today's Masons. Operative Masons who read this text saw it as a historical truth. They believed that they were applying a craft which dated back to the time of King Solomon, and which he had codified. However, the date of the construction of King Solomon's temple has not always been the key date in the Freemasons' cosmology. This central role was once given to the Tower of Babel, the Regius manuscript, which predates the Cook manuscript by 20 years, cites King Nimrod, the builder of the famous Tower of Babel, as the first and most excellent master. He it was, and not King Solomon, who gave the Masons their first charge, or in other words, their first rites, rituals, and practices. Masonic text known as the Thistle manuscript, of 1756, says that King Nimrod created the Masons, and gave them their signs and terms, so that they could distinguish themselves from other people, or the profanes. It was the first time that the Masons were organized as a craft. It was during the early years of the 18th century that Freemasonry stopped seeing its origins in the Tower of Babel, and that King Solomon alone was considered the first Grand Master. The 18th century Masonic texts shed light on the ideas and attitudes at the time of the shift from operative Masonry to speculative Masonry. These texts are called the early catechisms. This strange and sudden shift by speculative Masons, who wanted to break away from the origins of the craft, which honored the Tower of Babel and King Nimrod, they instead preferred our wise King Solomon, or as a Mason's examination of 1723 puts it, Grand Master in his time of Masonry and architecture. We have established that the origins of Freemasonry stem from ancient Babylon, which then made its way to Jerusalem, according to Masonic history. So how did the craft end up in Europe? Were the stonemasons really the originators of Freemasonry, or even the first Masons? How did these European stonemasons, or operative Masons, get their hands on something that was founded in the Middle East? Or were the stonemasons of Europe used as a cover or a scapegoat by someone else to be able to maintain their secret order? Let us examine this very carefully and trace back the correct history of the Freemasons. Pay very close attention to the following.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
ولما جاءهم رسول من عند الله مصدق لما معهم نبذ فريق من الذين أوتوا الكتاب كتاب الله وراء ظهورهم كأنهم لا يعلمون واتبعوا ما تتلو الشياطين على ملك سليمان وما كفر سليمان ولكن الشياطين كفروا يعلمون الناس السحر وما أنزل على الملكين ببابل هاروت وماروت وما يعلمان من أحد حتى يقولا إنما نحن فتنة فلا تكفر فيتعلمون منهما ما يفرقون به بين المرء وزوجه وما هم بضارين به من أحد إلا بإذن الله ويتعلمون ما يضرهم ولا ينفعهم ولقد علموا لمن اشتراه ما له في الآخرة من خلاق ولبئس ما شروا به أنفسهم لو كانوا يعلمون ولو أنهم آمنوا واتقوا لمثوبة من عند الله خير لو كانوا يعلمون.
Let us analyze the Quranic verses we've just heard. Many occult organizations, Satanists, Kabbalists, Freemasons, and many others attribute false accusations against Prophet Solomon, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him. A book, titled the Gosha, the Lesser Key of Solomon the King, first appeared in the 17th century, but much was taken from texts of the 16th century, including the Pseudemonarchia Daemonum, by Johann Weyer, and late medieval grimoires. It is likely that books by Jewish Kabbalists and mystics were also inspirations, and I will shortly explain further as to where exactly this knowledge has come from. Some of the material in the first section of the book, concerning the summoning of demons, dates to the 14th century and even earlier. The book claims that it was originally written by King Solomon, although this is certainly incorrect. The titles of nobility assigned to the demons were unknown in his time, as were the prayers to Jesus, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him, and the Christian Trinity included in the text. The Gosha contains detailed descriptions of spirits and the conjurations needed to invoke and oblige them to do the will of the conjurer, referred to as the exorcist. It details the protective signs and rituals to be performed, the actions necessary to prevent the spirits, we will refer to these spirits as jinn, for the correct terminology, from gaining control, the preparations prior to the invocations, and instructions on how to make the necessary instruments for the In and on about the year 597 BC, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon besieged the kingdom of Judah, destroyed the first temple built by Prophet Solomon. He also exiled many of the children of Israel back to Babylon, and took them in as slaves, including the household of many of the elites. Babylonian records, called the Jehoiachin's Rations tablets, written in cuneiform and dating to 592 BC, mention some of the children of Israel elites as being recipients of food ration in Babylon. These years are called the Babylonian exile, or the Babylonian captivity. The Babylonian exile is distinguished from the earlier exile of citizens of the northern kingdom of Israel to Assyria around 722 BC. The exile in Babylon, which directly affected mainly those of the upper class of society, occurred in three ways from 597 to 581 BC, as a result of the children of Israel, rebellions against Babylonian rule. Many of the exiles' elite, finding themselves in comfortable circumstances, assimilated into Babylonian society in ways that concerned the pious among them. We read this from the Bible. Ezekiel denounced such men as a rebellious house, and parts of the book of Isaiah, written during exilic times, likewise express concern over the adoption of Babylonian traditions. So what were these traditions that were learned by the children of Israel?
يعلمون الناس السحر وما أنزل على الملكين ببابل هاروت وماروت وما يعلمان من أحد حتى يقولا إنما نحن فتنة فلا تكفر.
The two angels must have come down in human form to teach those who wanted to learn, after warning them, as stated in God's book. In another chapter in regards to angels taking on human form, we read,
وَلَقَدْ جَاءَتْ رُسُلُنَا إِبْرَاهِيمَ بِالْبُشْرَى قَالُوا سَلَامًا قَالَ سَلَامٌ فَمَا لَبِثَ أَنْ جَاءَ بِعِجْلٍ حَنِيذٍ فَلَمَّا رَأَى أَيْدِيَهُمْ لَا تَصِلُ إِلَيْهِ نَكِرَهُمْ وَأَوْجَسَ مِنْهُمْ خِيفَةً قَالُوا لَا تَخَفْ إِنَّا أُرْسِلْنَا إِلَى قَوْمِ لُوطٍ.
Black magic is performed when a human magician communicates with the jinn and demands something, and in return, the jinn demands something from the human magician, like disbelief in God, to drink blood, a sacrifice, or to be worshipped, etc. We read from God's book.
وَأَنَّهُ كَانَ رِجَالٌ مِّنَ الْإِنسِ يَعُوذُونَ بِرِجَالٍ مِّنَ الْجِنِّ فَزَادُوهُمْ رَهَقًا. The
jinn did not only teach some of the children of Israel the magical arts, once they had found out how to contact the jinn, by the two angels, although they were forewarned, it would equate to disbelief in God, and it was only a mere test of their faith. Many of them wrote down the instructions on how to perform black magic, and have tried to keep it a secret ever since. The jinn continued to teach them magic, and accuse Prophet Solomon of committing disbelief, by practicing black magic. This is the reason why black magic practiced by many occultists today, is associated with Prophet Solomon, due to these accusations by the jinn, which were then adopted and transmitted by the Jews and other occultists, to this very day. So why did the jinn accuse Prophet Solomon of practicing magic? Because Prophet Solomon had power over the jinn, he enslaved them as a punishment for their evil doings. We read from the book of God.
ولقد فتنا سليمان وألقينا على كرسيه جسدا ثم أناب قال رب اغفر لي وهب لي ملكا لا ينبغي لأحد من بعدي إنك أنت الوهاب فسخرنا له الريح تجري بأمره رخاء حيث أصاب والشياطين كل بناء وغواص وآخرين مقرنين في الأصفاد هذا عطاؤنا فامنن أو أمسك بغير حساب
These be the 72 mighty kings and princes which King Solomon commanded into a vessel of brass, together with their legions. And it is to be noted that Solomon did this because of their pride. And when he had thus bound them up and sealed the vessel, he, by divine power, did hurl them into the depths of the lake in Babylon.
The black magicians have their mysticism, and they always firmly believe that they walk on the good path. No black magician believes that he walks on the evil path. The path of black magic is a broad way filled with vices and pleasures, but the ultimate end is total loss.
Worship enters into it, but as something that you choose to do to get the benefit of it. The Easterners have a term for it called bhakti yoga. It means the yoga of worship, but yoga is a system. So if we worship a deity, a goddess, or a god or something like that, we're doing it for a purpose. The Lemegeton and the Greater Key of Solomon, these handbooks of magic were attributed to Solomon for two reasons. Number one, he was the great magician, the legendary magician, and number two, these people were afraid to put their real names on the books because they'd get burned at the stake. Solomon is, of course, originally the king of Israel in the book of Kings in the Bible. And he lived around 800 BC, and he was the great king who built Solomon's temple. So now from his legend, if you will, arises the Masonic fraternity, and also arises the legend of Solomon the great magician. He supposedly mastered the demons and the spirits, and as the Arabians say, the jinn. I didn't bother to do a closing pentagram or to close the circle or to banish the spirit or anything like that. So we just left. And then 3 hours later, she grabbed me out of a sound sleep and sunk her fingernails into me and woke me up, and she was staring up at the ceiling, and she said, "There he is." And I had to drag her back into the circle, and we had to exorcise that spirit.
Magical rituals weren't only prominent in Babylon, or later in the Kingdom of Judah. It was also very much part of ancient Egypt, and was also part of their religious practices. Ancient Egyptian religion was a complex system of beliefs and rituals which was integral to ancient Egyptian society. It centered on the Egyptians' interaction with a multitude of deities who were believed to be present in and in control of the forces and elements of nature. The myths about these gods were meant to explain the origins and behavior of the forces they represented, and the practices of Egyptian religion were efforts to provide for the gods and gain their favor. Formal religious practice centered on the pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Although he was a human, the pharaoh was believed to possess a divine power, and was considered a god by virtue of his kingship. He acted as the intermediary between his people and the gods, and was obligated to sustain the gods through rituals and offerings so that they could maintain order in the universe. Therefore, the state dedicated enormous resources to the performance of these rituals and to the construction of the temples where they were carried out. Individuals could also interact with the gods for their own purposes, appealing for their help through prayer or compelling them to act through magic. As the mystery religion spread all over the world from Babylon, they found expression in all countries of the ancient world with only a change in the names of the gods and slight variations in the rituals. While the mystery religions were practiced in all of the countries of the ancient world, it was in Egypt where centuries of devotion developed them to their highest degree. According to Mason Manly P. Hall's book, Freemasonry, the ancient Egyptians, and I quote, "It is now generally acknowledged that the Egyptians, of all the ancient peoples, were the most learned in the occult sciences of nature. The wisest of philosophers from other nations visited Egypt to be initiated in the sacred mysteries by the priests of Thebes, Memphis, and Hermopolis. There is indeed, as we have established, a very definite link between the Egyptian mystery religion and the Masonic Lodge. This link can be readily established from the words of Masonic authors, and testimony can be provided to remove all reasonable doubt. In the book, The Meaning of Masonry, by past Provincial Grand Registrar, W. L. Wilmshurst, we find the statement, and I quote, "I am acquainted, for instance, with an Egyptian ceremonial system, some 5,000 years old, which taught precisely the same things as Masonry does." In the book, Freemasonry, Its Hidden Meaning, by George H. Steinmetz, we find the statement, and I quote, "Regardless of the origin of the modern lodge, or the name Freemason, we can, after freeing the symbolism of modern adaptations, discern in Freemasonry the outline of the teachings of the ancient mysteries of Egypt." In the same book, Mr. Steinmetz makes the statement connecting Freemasonry and the Egyptian mysteries. And I quote, "If the symbols can be consistently interpreted in this manner, throughout the 3 degrees we have confirmed Freemasonry to be the reincarnation of the ancient mysteries of Egypt." 33-degree Mason Manly P. Hall relates the efforts of early Masonic historians to link Hiram Abiff to the Egyptian mystery religion. Early Masonic historians such as Albert Mackey, Robert Fregould and Albert Pike were of a single purpose in their efforts to establish a definite correspondence between the Haramic legend of Freemasonry and the Osiris myth as expounded in the initiatory rituals of the Egyptians. From the Lost Keys of Freemasonry by 33rd degree Manly P. Hall, man is a god in the making, and as in the mystic myths of Egypt on the potter's wheel he is being molded. Unas eats magical charms, behold, Unas eateth of that which the red crown sendeth forth, he increaseth, and the magical charms of the gods are in his belly. The following quote is a comment on the texts about King Unas by the translator of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, H. Wallace Budge, the notion that, by eating the flesh, or particularly by drinking the blood, of another living being, a man absorbs his nature or life into his own, is one which appears among primitive peoples in many forms. It is indeed an accurate assessment that these murders in the Unas texts were performed in a ritual and religious manner for the purpose of obtaining the life force or energy force of the victim. Not only was this the purpose of these ancient Egyptian texts, but it is also the purpose behind modern Satanism. This common underlying purpose can be seen by comparing these texts and their assessment with the words of Master Satanist, a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Grand Master, and a 97th degree the Rite of Memphis, of Aleister Crowley. He writes, and I quote, "The blood is the life." This simple statement is explained by the Hindus by saying that the blood is the principal vehicle of vital prana. It was the theory of the ancient magicians that any living being is a storehouse of energy varying in quantity according to the size and health of the animal, and in quality according to its mental and moral character. At the death of the animal, this energy is liberated suddenly. For magical purposes, the animal should therefore be killed within a circle, or the triangle, as the case may be, so that its energy cannot escape. An animal should be selected whose nature accords with that of the ceremony. For the highest spiritual working, one must accordingly choose that victim which contains the greatest and purest force. A male child of perfect innocence and high intelligence is the most satisfactory and suitable victim. Those magicians who object to the use of blood have indeed void to replace it with incense. But the bloody sacrifice, though more dangerous, is more efficacious. And for nearly all purposes human sacrifice is the best. Here is an undercover footage of a goat being sacrificed inside a pentagram in a Masonic lodge in Turkey for a high degree initiation.
From whatever part of the world thou art, and answer our questions. Come presently, come visibly, come affectly, manifest that which we desire. Call by the true and living God. We call. Shaddai, Adonai, wide is thy name. Adonai, Shaddai. Spirit.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
قل أوحي إلي أنه استمع نفر من الجن فقالوا إنا سمعنا قرآنا عجبا يهدي إلى الرشد فآمنا به ولن نشرك بربنا أحدا وأنه تعالى جد ربنا ما اتخذ صاحبة ولا ولدا وأنه كان يقول سفيهنا على الله شططا وأنا ظننا أن لن تقول الإنس والجن على الله كذبا وأنه كان رجال من الإنس يعوذون برجال من الجن فزادوهم رهقا وأنهم ظنوا كما ظننتم أن لن يبعث الله أحدا.
We will discuss the jinn in great detail in a later episode, so stay tuned. Books of the secret arts of black magic, Kabbalah and the ancient mystery schools. In 1187, after 200 years of war,
And your queen. Your king, such as he is, I leave to you, and what God will make of it. No one will be harmed. I swear to God.
Christians butchered every Muslim within the walls when they took this city.
I am not those men. I am Salahuddin. Salahuddin.
once the Templars arrived back in Europe, they became very wealthy, they became the bankers, and the finances of all the European monarchs. In 1307, or 120 years after their departure from Jerusalem, their secret order was in place and fully operational. Pope Clement VII and King Philip of France accused the Templars of several heresies, including devil worship, black magic, sodomy, and many other mortal sins, which were part of their newfound rituals. The Templars were rounded up, tortured, imprisoned, and put to death. But a few of them managed to escape the same fate of their brethren, and that's when they went underground and changed their identity from the Knights Templars to the Freemasons. They found home in Scotland. King Robert the Bruce was excommunicated by the Pope, so the Knights Templars or Freemasons were welcomed with open arms. Both shared the same enemy, the Catholic Church. In the mid-15th century, the Crusader William Sinclair started construction of Rosslyn Chapel, which is the first landmark of the Freemasons, and is supposed to be a representation of Solomon's Temple. Another William Sinclair was the first Scottish Grand Master of Freemasonry, at Culwinning Lodge, which is the first Freemasonic lodge, also called the Mother Lodge, or Lodge Number 0.
In his book, The Secret Destiny of America, Manly P. Hall wrote that world democracy was the secret dream of the great classical philosophers, saying that the brilliant plan of the ancients has survived to our time, and it will continue to function until the great work is accomplished. Many researchers believe this great work is the secret behind the wars and rumors of war America has been involved in through the 20th century, right up to the present day. Could this plan of the ancients to establish a world democracy be the real hidden agenda of secret societies? And was this ancient plan echoed in the 2005 inaugural address given by President Bush?
When our founders declared a new order of the ages, they were acting on an ancient hope that is meant to be fulfilled.
The occult is working at the highest levels of our society, using the military and financial power of the United States to bring about this one world state. And the president has spoken openly about it, how the purpose of the United States is to bring democracy to the nations of the world. Where did this become the function of our nation, to bring democracy to the world? You only need to read the writings of Manly P. Hall, where he tells you that for 3,000 years, secret societies have been working to bring democracy to the world. You read President Bush's speech, before the Association on Democracy, the National Association on Democracy. He tells you for 2,500 years, people have been working to bring democracy to the world.
Yet the ancient philosophers recognized that a true democracy could only be achieved by a society of perfected men.
The perfected men would be comfortable in a true democracy. And probably a true democracy cannot emerge until there is enough of such human beings in the world that can take over the government of man. It will be that kind of leadership. It will be like Plato's vision of the philosopher king, the man who has wisdom and the man who has power. Democracy has the occult promise of a fair world to live in.
Now, you mentioned the occult promise. How would you define a term like that for an audience who's...
Well, probably define that term by saying that promise is
explain the word occult.
Well, it's obscure. It's hidden, not visible to the normal eye. So an occult promise is something that is inherent, but only visible to those who have that inner vision. So a fair world is a kind of occult promise at the heart of democracy.
But is this occult promise part of America's Christian heritage? And if not, could this account for why the many symbols that adorn America's capital city come not from the Bible, but from the ancient mystery religion?
And if America were really, truly a Christian nation, what would all of these mythological characters be in our city? Certainly the Christian influence was very strong. From the Christian point of view, we were formed as a Christian nation. But from the occultist point of view, and those associated with astrology and the ancient mystery religions, America was, of course, and Washington, D.C. was to represent their position. So you've had the two forces, in America ever since its formation.
While it seems that most of America's leaders have upheld Christian ideals, their reason for doing so is often questioned. If they were Christians, why would they erect monuments to pagan gods and goddesses? And if they were pagans, why confess to Christian ideals? Manly Hall suggests the reason may have been one of self-preservation. He argues that because of the persecutions of organized religion in the Old World, the secret societies employed even greater methods of secrecy to protect their occult philosophies, making themselves sound as though their beliefs had to do with Christianity, which was the dominant belief in Europe, and eventually America. He says the pagan intellectuals reclothed their original ideas in a garment of Christian phraseology, but bestowed the keys of the symbolism only upon those duly initiated and bound to secrecy. It is for this reason that all secret societies have an initiation process whereby members are bound by blood oaths not to reveal the secrets of the order. A chief factor that contributes to confusion about the beliefs of America's founders is the presence of Rosicrucianism. The Rosicrucians are a mystical, arcane society that played a major role in the development of Freemasonry. The rose and cross, which symbolize the society, are also the source of its confusion. The rose is the symbol of secrecy and represents the pagan mystery religions, while the cross symbolizes Christianity. Rosicrucianism is when the two are combined. Because of this, one can begin to understand how a man like Charles Thomson could be famous for his English translation of the Old and New Testaments, and at the same time approve the design of the Great Seal for the United States with the all-seeing eye of Horus floating over an Egyptian pyramid. Thomson was closely associated with a man named Peter Miller, a well-known 18th century Rosicrucian and the leader of the Ephrata community in Ephrata, Pennsylvania. The Ephrata cloister is believed to have been the first esoteric settlement in the New World, with connections to some of the founding fathers, such as Benjamin Franklin and George Washington. The early Ephrata movement clearly held mystical beliefs, even driving stakes into doorways to ward off evil spirits.
We now know for certain that they were Rosicrucians. It was Washington was close to these individuals, as well as Franklin and Jefferson.
Benjamin Franklin even enlisted the aid of Peter Miller to translate the Declaration of Independence into a number of European languages and to inform the world of America's independence. The printing for these translations was done at the Ephrata cloister. Peter Miller would have been further connected to many of the founding fathers through the American Philosophical Society, founded originally by Benjamin Franklin in 1743. The Society's members included such prominent figures as Thomas Paine, Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, the Marquis de Lafayette, George Washington, Charles Thomson, and of course, Peter Miller. Later members would also include such names as Charles Darwin and Thomas Edison. Franklin Society is thought to be directly related to the earlier concepts set forth by Sir Francis Bacon. According to Michael Howard in his book, The Occult Conspiracy, Franklin's American Philosophical Society was operated in the same tradition as the Royal Society in England, which was based on Sir Francis Bacon's Rosicrucian concept of the Invisible College.
In the history of the Royal Society, they refer to the beginnings of the Royal Society came from a group of people who called themselves the Invisible College.
The purpose of the Royal Society of London was to further Bacon's advancement of learning through scientific investigation. It is without question, however, that some of their work led to the metaphysical and the occult.
And then we find that the Rosicrucians called themselves the Invisible Brotherhood, and the College of Rosicrucians was therefore, or was called by them, the Invisible College.
A Rosicrucian influence can be clearly seen in some of America's symbols. For example, this image of a pelican feeding her young appears in Manly Hall's Secret Teachings of All Ages and is very common to Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry. Now notice the Great Seal for the state of Louisiana. This particular replica is found inside the inner corridors of the U.S. Capitol. The Temple Church in London is a well-known Knight Templar church. Here we can see that the Golden Rosy Cross can be traced back to the mysterious knights. Now, notice the art surrounding this shrine. How a series of squares are shown with red and golden roses in the midst. The shrine opposite has a variation of the same design. Now consider this same pattern as it appears throughout the interior of the state capitol. Inside the old Supreme Court room, and in various forms throughout the Library of Congress. Sir Francis Bacon became the chief of the Rosicrucians in England. His famous saying, "Knowledge is power," is found written inside the Library of Congress, while a statue of Bacon can be seen on the upper level. Elsewhere in the main library is a Baconian passage from his collection of essays. It reads, "The inquiry, knowledge, and belief of truth is the sovereign good of human nature." This saying is found over a statue representing philosophy. Could this be an indication that Baconian philosophy governs the New World concept? Bacon took his inspiration from the goddess Pallas Athena, known for her helmet of invisibility. Pallas Athena images also turn up throughout Washington, D.C. The Virginia State Seal bears the image of Athena with her foot upon a fallen king whose crown is cast aside. The word Sic Semper Tyrannis, thus always to tyrants, written beneath. To the Romans, Athena was called Minerva. This painting of Minerva can be found in the Great Hall of the Library of Congress. At 15.5 feet high, it is the most imposing image in the room. Notice she holds a spear that comes like a ray of light from the sun, with a traditional helmet of Athena at her feet. This particular work was done by 19th century artist Elihu Vedder. Vedder was known as a symbolist painter whose style was part of a movement that can be traced to France during the 19th century and an art house called the Salon de la Rose Croix. Yes, they were a group of Rosicrucian artists known for promoting symbolic and often bizarre imagery. Some of which, like the image of this satyr, seems to be repeated inside the Library of Congress. It's not clear if Vedder himself was a Rosicrucian, but one of his chief influences certainly was. William Butler Yeats was a prominent member of the Golden Dawn, a Rosicrucian secret society. Yeats, along with Irish mystic William Blake, are said to be two of Vedder's leading inspirations. Vedder's own occult themes are filled with haunting, esoteric imagery, like this work, which is called The Cup of Death. In addition to Minerva, Vedder was commissioned to do a series of paintings illustrating government, which can be found at the east end of the Great Hall in the Library of Congress. Now let's look again at this image from the Salon de la Rose Croix. It pictures Leonardo da Vinci on the right, dressed like Joseph of Arimathea, whom occultists believe was the original cupbearer for the Holy Grail. Beside him is Dante Alighieri, dressed as a Knight Templar. By now, most people are familiar with Da Vinci's arcane background thanks to Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code. Most are also familiar with Dante's Inferno, representing the many circles of hell. But according to Michael Howard, Dante was no ordinary writer. He was in fact a Rosicrucian Grand Master who wove Rosicrucian philosophies into his writings. Masonic philosopher Albert Pike wrote that it was Dante who first publicly expounded the symbol of the Rose Cross. Something partly seen in William Blake's sketch of Dante's Paradise, with a cross in the center. But now look at this drawing done by famed artist Gustave Doré. The title of Doré's illustration is, quote, "The saintly throng in the form of a rose."
2,000 years before mankind was created, there were creatures on the earth, and they caused corruption on it and shed blood. Then God sent against them a troop of angels who casted them away to islands in the seas. It is time to start defining and explain some of our subject matter I have mentioned previously, and will continue to mention throughout the series. We will go back and sketch the history of the Masons, and further discuss their craft. But for now, let us ask a question: who are, or what are the jinn? They are unseen creatures that we share this earth with. They are interdimensional creatures that have been called by many names: aliens, spirits, Ethereans, ultra-terrestrials, and more. In God's book, the Holy Quran, their creator, God Almighty, gives them a name: the jinn. The Arabic word, jinn, means hidden, or that which is concealed. Under normal circumstances, they can see us, and we cannot see them. The jinn have a free will to choose, just like human beings. The Bible calls Satan a fallen angel. This is incorrect. Angels were created from pure light, and do not have free will or the ability to choose. They only obey the orders of their Creator. The jinn are of three types: those who have wings and fly in the air, those who resemble snakes and dogs, and those who travel about ceaselessly. No human can see the jinn in their true essence. However, some resemble vultures and snakes, others tall men in white garb. They may even appear as dragons, or a number of other animals. In addition to their animal forms, the jinn occasionally assume human form to mislead and destroy their human victims. For example, in one of the historical battles of the Muslims, named the Battle of Badr, the most powerful amongst the jinn, or Satan, assumed the form of a man named Suraka ibn Malik, and urged the pagan Arabs to move forward to the battle, saying, Then God sent the angel Gabriel against him, and when Satan saw him, he cried out to the pagans, I have nothing to do with you. I see that which ye do not see. I fear Allah, and Allah is severe in retribution, and then he fled. The jinn can even possess human beings, including in black magic rituals, when they are summoned by the magicians. I will explain with little more detail on how this is done by the magicians, and show you via video illustration. Unlike humans, the jinn live for thousands of years, and have the ability to see angels as previously mentioned. Let us view a video, which shows the Islamic exorcism. A jinn who is 7,000 years old, has possessed a man.
قربان ناوي تشيا فاريا شوف تغير اسمه يقول اسمي فاريا فاريا وين أهلك فاريا كونغو كونغو شنو كونغو أستاذ كونغو تشيا
كونغو اسم جمهورية في أفريقيا
في أفريقيا نعم كونغو أنت شو اسمك فاريا أنت مسلم مسيحي يهودي جولك يعني يهودي شو يقول أستاذ يقول عن يهودي كل الزين الله أكبر شوف أنت مرة ثانية تجي يمي مو صحيح يا هذا الأخ علي محمد جيت يمي مو يقول نعم أنت تستسلم لو ما تستسلم أنت مسلمان يا نبي مسلمان قربان تو تمنى كم صار
زور
بالله بس درو مكان درو كلي ده كم صار قربان لازم انت راس بالله تمنى كم ده السر بالكار حتى زار سال حوازار درون عقي الله أكبر. هذا يقول أني مرأة عمري 7,000 سنة وأني أهلي بالكونغو هو منطقة أفريقيا. أنت أسود أترشي
رش بس
قربان تو ساحر عندنا نسيت الوازة ناسي
لا
قربان تو بوش هاتنا ولا شيء
أسينا هو استابو
إيه
إيش بدو أسينا تهوى إيش بدو أسينا تهوى نحو هو استابو أميس شو عنا شي زور شجوان بخ جوان بلتشاوك يا كاري درا
عشق يقول يقول هذا كان يشتغل باليونان
يشتغل باليونان وأنا عاشق لأنه جميل جدا.
أنت بارك الله تو أتواني بسأل ليش يوم كسيك
لا
هذه بو ولا لا شيء من لا شيء ولا
لا
بو ناتواني ولا لا شيء من وازي لي بينا
ناتواني
بو أخذ ناتواني تخواب زام دبر شيء بو ناتواني سبوك راسي كان بلي عزك مع كتب رادو خلد لين جندلويا
تدرونيا
هذه بوت عندهم عالي مكان ما مستاكن إن كان ذكن قسم من الشيوخ وساداته طارق الهاشمي هو عنده قناة فضائية يقول الجن هو وسواس ما يعبد جسم الإنسان. هذا كلام صحيح؟
نعم
يدخل جسم الإنسان جني.
مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم محمد سيد الكونين والثقلين محمد سيد الكونين والثقلين والفريقين من عرب ومن عجم مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم أوذيت في الله لم تهزم ولم تهني أوذيت في الله لم تهزم ولم تهني حتى غادت